Hello, you're listening to Linguistically Aware, a conversation based podcast about the ways we use, understand, and think about language. My name is Dusan, a grad student of linguistics at the University of Calgary, and I'm sitting down with linguists, experts who study language, to talk about a number of roles language plays in our lives. This is CJSW 90.9 FM broadcasting on the traditional territories of all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 of Southern Alberta. In this episode, I talked to Joy Windsor, a postdoctoral associate at the University of Calgary. Joy has a PhD in linguistics, and his specialty is phonology, the scientific study that explains how humans arrange speech sounds into sentences. His research expertise also extends to Indigenous languages, sentence structure, and most important for today's talk, constructed languages or conlangs. You've probably heard about Esperanto, Klingon, Dothraki, High Valyrian. Well, on this podcast, we talked about the ways languages are constructed, how conlangs relate to language science, and what he's learned about and from doing this work.
Lahat narish. Hahutsa yu'u. Lahat heath hanarit kawisha enta porish. Tran kawisha. Lahat hawasha. Lanra ikath yan. Uuth lahanra enanishta lan. La jutharatishun. Lan jana ja tu ewut. Joch tu wahwinansta jethacho.
That was Joy playing the guitar, talking in a constructed language while redoing the introduction to the Star Trek Next Generation. If you're impressed by that, keep on listening. An abundance of excitement is about to come. Joy, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. Welcome to the second episode of Linguistically Aware. You are a conlanger and the president of the Language Creation Society. I would like to start with that. Who is a conlanger and what is the Language Creation Society?
It's some of the most challenging questions to answer is exactly what is a conlanger, who is a conlanger, because I don't think there's one mold that really captures everyone. So a conlang is just it's a language that was purposely created by one or more individuals for whatever that goal happens to be. And a conlanger is just someone who engages in the art and science of conlanging. And why someone might do that is there's so many reasons. A lot of people do it for film, television, books, tabletop role-playing games, and it's to add verisimilitude to the world they're trying to create. Other people do it as a refuge to create their own personal language, to express what they have trouble expressing through their mother tongue. Other people create languages as moduses of international communication. And there are so many other reasons people engage in this. So, a conlanger could be anyone from someone like you or I who have done advanced degrees in linguistics and want to play with our linguistic theories a little bit and see what we can get, to someone who has had absolutely no training in linguistics whatsoever, but they come up with these beautiful art languages that allow them to construct poetry or express themselves. And there's no perfect mold that captures everyone.
Who is entitled to conlanging that's not primarily directed for or towards linguists, experts in language? Anyone can be a conlanger.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I got an email from one person yesterday saying, "What prerequisites do I need to become a conlanger?" I don't know. Do you like language? Do you want to play with language? Congratulations, you're a conlanger. Start the trial and error process that we've all gone through. Like you don't need a degree in linguistics or a degree in language. You just need the interest and the passion to carry it through.
Tell me more about the Language Creation Society. You're a president of the Language Creation Society,
Yep.
and as I assume you receive lots of emails from people asking you about joining. What are the benefits of joining the Language Creation Society?
So the Language Creation Society has been around for a little bit more than a decade now. It was the brainchild of a person named Sai, who wanted to be able to host a language creation conference, recognizing there were people out there who engage in this hobby, this craft, and wanting to bring them together. And it was an interesting loophole in California at the time. I can't remember which university they were attending, but if they registered as a club, then they could get university funds to potentially host this conference. And from there, the Language Creation Society really took off as just a vehicle to have a language creation conference every 2 years. And we've obviously grown a lot over the last 13 or so years. We've helped HBO find conlangers for Game of Thrones, so David J. Peterson probably being the most well-known conlanger, and probably the only person who has ever made a living at conlanging in history. But the society is several hundred members from around the world. It's run by a board of directors, and of course I sit on that board. I elected to that board and named the president a couple of years ago. And I do get emails almost daily on somebody looking for an expert opinion, somebody looking to hire a conlanger, or some people going, "What is this thing?" or asking, "Do we offer scholarships?" All kinds of stuff. The primary benefit to becoming a member is we do offer discounts for some of our things, like the Language Creation Conference, which is still sort of the backbone of what the society is. But we also connect people who are looking to hire a conlanger with people looking to be hired as conlangers through our jobs postings, which we do offer to members first before they go to the public at large. There's also email lists, so you can connect with other conlangers, and our email lists are quite active, whether it's just being, "Hey, I just published this article, you guys might find it fascinating," to "How do serial verbs even work, because I want to try and implement them into my constructed language." And someone out there on our email list probably has a good idea of what serial verbs and Hmong is or something like that, and can provide references or examples. And it creates a great networking community, so we can bounce ideas off of each other, and incredibly supportive. Ideas don't get shot down. They might get questioned in an academic sense, but usually with the goal of building each other up, which is something I really appreciate about all of our members.
How did you start creating languages? And has your linguistic background influenced that?
So when I was much younger and starting to play Dungeons and Dragons as a teenager, I decided, my wizards needed arcane words, or my alien races or monstrous races needed to speak something. And basically everything I made was some bastardized version of Gaelic or German or French. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible, and I'm glad none of that survives. And then during my master's degree at UCalgary, a friend of mine approached me in the hallway, and he said, "You speak Klingon, right?" "No." "But you're a Trekkie." Yeah, huge Trekkie. "Could you do a talk on the linguistics of Klingon at the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo?" I was like, went on Amazon. The grammar and dictionary was 99 cents. I'm like, yeah, I got this. I did that once. I didn't expect it to be a big deal, but people absolutely loved learning about the inner workings of Klingon. I loved researching it. And so I started doing more and more talks on Klingon. And then through the undergraduate linguistics club, Verbatim, they asked me to do a workshop on how to invent a language. And, academically, I understood how one would do that. I had looked into a number of the more well-known conlangs and understood generally how they were created. So I started offering a couple of workshops, and eventually I said, if I'm going to teach this, maybe I should try doing it. And I started working on a language for a Dungeons and Dragons monstrous race called the Zill. And I took into considerations they don't have lips, so no bilabial sounds, and they have these large protruding tusks, so I wanted something to play with that. And I ended up creating what a lot of us call kitchen sink languages, where we go, ooh, this is cool, ooh, this is cool, ooh, this is cool, and just adding absolutely everything. So since you're a phonetician, you'll appreciate that I had clicks and implosives and ejectives and contrasting oral vowels and nasal vowels and creaky voiced vowels, and it was just terrible. I remember the copula, the verb to be in that language, was oh. And I had tried to contrast oral and nasal vowels, but personally, I cannot produce an oral vowel after a click. So I have never produced the copula as it is supposed to be produced in that language. And it's a great example of what not to do, and I definitely learned what not to do from that, and tried again with several other languages, both personal and professionally. And yes, my linguistics training does play a huge role in the way I approach constructing a language. My goal when I'm doing this is to make a language more naturalistic. So when I'm trying to figure out what the phonological system in the language should look like, I actually use Elon Drescher's contrastive hierarchy. So I work out all the phonological features of every phoneme in the language. And then I look at what are the natural phonotactics out of what I've designed there, and how would they interact? What phonological rules would change the pronunciation in certain combinations? I also use Martina Vilchko's universal spine hypothesis when I'm doing the syntax of my language. That enables me to do some fun things, like maybe I don't want to use tense in a language, but maybe I'll use a realis irrealis system, and I can use Martina Vilchko's universal spine to still make the language look natural, but create fun new contrasts with the language. So I'm a very theoretical conlanger. I really enjoy playing with the background grammar and having this sketch like, this is what would go into a paper to describe the grammar, and then I get to the stage where I have to invent some words, and I kind of go, can't I just stick with the grammar? But it's all part of it. But I know other people, they don't care about the theory. They have this natural sense for how things flow, how things go together, what sounds good. And without any linguistic training, they're making these amazing languages. And I usually point to two conlangers in particular, Tony Harris and Jim Hopkins, who created the Alursa language and the Itlani language. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly, respectively. And they're phenomenal. And these people aren't linguists. They're not linguistically trained other than picking up books themselves. And they both fluently speak their languages and can have conversations with each other in each other's language. And it's phenomenal what they've accomplished.
What would you recommend to a beginner?
My biggest recommendation is be prepared to fail, whatever they set their own goals for. I really think they should be willing to scrap whatever they come up with the first time or the first few times, because I think a lot of us are really disappointed by our first attempt at conlanging, but we learn a lot from the experience and figure out how to march ahead pretty quickly. The second thing I would recommend is to lay out your goals for yourself. People talk all the time about a conlanging failing or a conlang failing. So if one wanted to take a conlang like Itlani and say, how many speakers of Itlani are there? I think there are actually a few now. There's a pretty good Facebook following for this language, but definitely not the million plus speakers of Esperanto, and people might talk about a conlang failing because only a few people speak it. If the goal was never to have international communication or replace Mandarin or English or what have you, then that's not an accurate measure to evaluate a conlang by. So you have to know what your own goals are and not let other people get you down. And the third thing is be willing to pick up a few grammars, be willing to go to Wikipedia, figure out what grammar is, what it looks like, what sort of questions should you be able to answer, and just have fun with it.
Why are some conlangs more successful than other?
Successful, again, having the meaning of people speaking it in this instance. Perhaps one of the most successful, by that measure, conlangs, and I'm not including Esperanto in this or Volapük in this one, but I'm going to suggest is Klingon. There are probably tens of thousands of people who have, at least at one point, tried to learn Klingon. There are thousands of people using the Duolingo course to learn Klingon. Perhaps more people trying to learn High Valyrian on Duolingo. But we do actually have, probably one or two, maybe 200 advanced speakers, somewhere between 20 and 70 fluent speakers of Klingon. There's been at least one child who has learned Klingon as a first language. And most people immediately assume that all of these people are huge Trekkie nerds. They watch the films, they fall in love with the franchise, and, some people go to conventions, some people cosplay. These people choose to interact with the franchise by learning an alien language. And that's not always the case. There are some very, very good Klingon speakers who have never watched Star Trek. I think the majority of them are Star Trek fans. That's certainly my vehicle into Klingon studies. But some people simply hear about the health benefits of learning a second language. It keeps the mind sharp. It might stave off things like dementia. And they're up for a challenge. And on a whim, they decide to learn something that's more alien rather than more earthbound and practical, perhaps. And they start with Klingon, and they really excel at it because it is a full language. It does have a speech community, and you can engage with other Klingon speakers. And I really think that's the key. If I were to talk about my Tehosian language, for example, one of the conlangs I've made, there are literally 0 speakers of Tehosian. Even in the fantasy world that language was created for, it's already a dead language in that world too. And it only exists in manuscripts. So there's no community. Even if I did want to pick up my grammar and study it and become a speaker of Tehosian, the language I invented, I probably wouldn't succeed because I wouldn't have anyone to talk to. Klingon, Dothraki, High Valyrian, Natvi, Esperanto, these languages all have groups of people who can share the language and can communicate. And other than it being cool for a particular in-group of people, I think the language community existing and being able to use the language is the real key to success by that measure.
It's fascinating that there are entire worlds around languages.
Yeah.
How can a language be as successful as those languages if there is no specific show to be featured on or no community? Is that a possibility?
if there's no community, I would say the possibility is relatively low. Again, if that's what your measure of success is. I'm trying not to get myself in trouble by saying, the old form of conlanging was auxiliary language creation.
Yeah, what's the difference between auxiliary languages and con languages or constructed languages?
I like to say that conlang or constructed languages, or some people use the term glossopoetics, is sort of this high level overarching term, and it's any language that's intentionally created by one or more people. Auxiliary languages, or auxlanging, is a branch of conlanging where the intended purpose is international communication. Artlanging is a branch of conlanging where the intended purpose is to create something artistically, whether that's for a race in a TV show or a novel to speak, or something personal. Heartlanging is creating a language specifically for yourself. It's your own world, your own refuge. Then we have things like englanging, where the purpose is some sort of experimentation or some other specific purpose. This is used in linguistic experimentation quite frequently. And then there are other branches that other people would make. But I would suggest that artlanging, which is what I do, and auxlanging, which is the international communication, same thing, just different goals. And they're all forms of conlanging.
Why haven't those languages like Esperanto and Volapük, why haven't they succeeded as international languages? Because the intent of the authors was for these languages to be spoken by everybody in the world and to connect people in that way.
Yeah, I think Esperanto is perhaps the best example, and on the measure of number of speakers, it's probably the most successful conlang of all time. L.L. Zamenhof created Esperanto because he wanted a perfectly regular and, by hypothesis, easy to learn, easy to understand language that everyone could speak, and you could have a global community speaking a single language. And he obviously a very brilliant person with grammar. I don't believe he had any linguistic training whatsoever, but he was reading a Russian grammar, if I remember correctly, and he happened to notice that there was a group of words that ended the same way and a different group of words that all end the same way, and what we would learn as declensions in linguistics, or different noun types or verb types. And he said, why do we have languages that differ from these obvious patterns? Why couldn't we make a language that just absolutely stuck to these patterns? And he did, and he created Esperanto. And I believe there's a story where he had to create it twice because the first version got destroyed on him. But he created this perfectly regular language. So I want you to put yourself in his shoes. You've just created this absolute masterpiece of grammar. It's perfectly regular. All nouns end in the same vowel. All adjectives end in a different but unique vowel. All verbs follow a single pattern. And you go to your next door neighbor and you say, I've invented Esperanto. Do you want to learn it? It's going to be a language that everyone on the world can communicate in. It's perfectly regular and it's very easy to learn. And your neighbor goes, oh, that sounds really cool. How many people speak it? Well, I do. And after you learn it, you will too. And then we'll get some other people. Chances are that neighbor's going to go, learning a language is a pretty big investment. Like that's a lot of time and energy. Maybe come back when there's a few more people speaking it. Now, obviously, there are people out there who go, this sounds awesome. I do want to learn it. And now the Esperanto language community is over 1 million strong. We have people learning Esperanto as their first language. I know there are people at the University of Calgary who do speak Esperanto. I'm not one of them. But it was remarkably successful despite all of those challenges of convincing people to speak another language. And, in just normal society, if you go up to any given person on the street, no matter how you sell it, can you go up to someone and say, hey, I want you to learn French. I want you to learn Spanish. They're like, why? English. And I'd suggest that most auxiliary languages face very similar problems regardless of where they are.
Never leave behind what got you through the struggle or what got you through the grind. It's on the rise, the restorer, and I can feel it. It's slowly coming back to the core of good music. Back when legends was spitting, the shit was different. It wasn't debates, if a bar was actually written. I'ma be creative, super innovative. I promise when I make it, I will never leave the basics. Hip-hop, it started on some conscious shit, acknowledge it. Instead of getting caught up in these politics, makes you want to question where a lot of people's knowledge is. I guess it makes sense because we ain't promoting colleges. This is the generation that barely knows what homage is. Fighting flows and rhymes, man, they on some straight garbage. Yeah, originality is key and I won't be a part of it. Not much real left in the game. Short yada shit, been known to kill the game. That's why I had a scholarship. Been lethal with the words out of this world on some carnage shit. It's levels to the game. Keep your mode on default, never change in any settings. They grounded like asphalt. People selling out for riches just to get an applause. Instead of standing for something different, critical cost. I'ma talk about the shit that people choose to ignore. Cause these people just flexing, they ain't even trying to rap no more. You can never leave behind what got you through the struggle or what got you through the grind. It's on the rise, the restorer, and I can feel it. It's slowly coming back to the core of good music. Back when legends was spitting, the shit was different. It wasn't debates, if a bar was actually written. I'ma be creative, super innovative. I promise when I make it, I will never leave the basics. It comes back around a boomerang, a figure eight, a sonic boomer, 808, and anything we make is great. Making classics, 8x8 subliminal shots that we take. It's like the game that came out on the system around 1998. The greatness that we emulate is Kobe wearing number 8. If we communicate what's real, then we gon' be straight. It's inevitable to happen like a natural disaster. Mobap is coming back, but it couldn't come any faster. The complexity.
Why are these conlangs such a good exercise for the brain?
We know from a mental health perspective, or I shouldn't say we know, we have strong evidence to suggest from a mental health perspective that working with language is good for the brain. Language is described by some people as a global process, meaning it uses both hemispheres of the brain. And learning a second language can have mental cognitive benefits, we believe. We believe having more than one language can stave off dementia. It can keep the brain active into old age, things of that variety. And surely inventing your own language probably has similar effects. It engages the brain. But I think for a lot of us, when we're conlanging, we are actively rejecting the languages we speak to a certain degree. So when you're sitting down, you could look and you could go, okay, my word for apple is going to be ibis, and my word for aardvark is going to be alon, and my word for banana is going to be sisi, and my word for dog is going to be ob. And you put that all together and you make a sentence using these words you just created. And if you follow the rules of English syntax, of English ordering, all you've done is, I'll quote David J. Peterson, created the most annoying way to speak English possible. When we're conlanging, we're thinking of what is the grammar, what's new, what's interesting about the way I'm putting this language together, what's interesting about the morphology, what's interesting about the sound sequences. Do we have things like one moose, two moose, three moose, but one dog, two dogs, three dogs? Or do we have a Pockle number system or something we can do something else interesting with, numbers of 3 or numbers of 5 or things like that? We're rejecting things like the word for ocean is just a word on its own, ocean, whereas in Old English it might have been a whale road, a whale road. And, we're coming up with these interesting compounds, and we're rejecting some of the assumptions we've made with our own language. This gets a little Sapir-Whorf for the linguistically trained people, but speaking another language can influence your perception, the way you treat things. So I think Klingon is a great example of this. In English, you can love something or you can not love something. But in Klingon, to love something is to unhate it. And it's that opposite way of thinking, and a lot of the more positive, more friendly emotions that we would express in a natural language with their own word, Klingon uses this negation affix plus the more pejorative form of the verb. So you unhate something to love it. And it's that wrapping your mind around a different philosophy, a different culture that really opens your mind to different possibilities. So I think that's the direct answer to why is it a good thought experiment, because you're pushing yourself to not be constrained by your own language and your own culture.
How do these languages shape the community as well, the society around them? Of course, these are all fictional or invented societies, but still, it is something to think about when creating a language. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think David Peterson is a master of this sort of thing. So he talks a lot about when he was inventing Dothraki. These are nomadic people. They're horse lords. Their life tends to revolve around riding or horses in some variety. I wish I had my fact page of Dothraki sayings up, because Hashur Dathraichek, I think I mispronounced that, but Hashur Dathraichek is how are you, but it literally means how do you ride? Are you sitting well in the saddle, kind of thing, if the Dothraki used a saddle. So a lot of the cultural and the idiomatic expressions in Dothraki have to do with riding in some variety. I shouldn't claim I was working on a translation in Dothraki. I was asking David to do a translation into Dothraki, and we had a suggestion for it. So there's a very popular feminist saying, "Nevertheless, she persisted," and it's a wonderful saying, and we wanted to render that into Dothraki for a title page in my girlfriend's dissertation, actually. And rather than persisting in some variety, which I don't believe there is a word to persist in the Dothraki language yet, we suggested maybe the translation would be, "Nevertheless, she continues to ride." Mazin Dathrae, which I probably also mispronounced, but it was nevertheless third person singular, because there's no masculine or feminine in the Dothraki language for grammatical gender. So nevertheless, third person singular rides. And it was just such a beautiful translation, and really revolved around the Dothraki horse riding culture.
Yeah, and if I'm correct, staying on a horse is very important.
Yeah, I don't know any idioms directly surrounding that, but I'm sure they're there.
That's exactly the point. You've watched The Office, I guess, the American TV show, when Dwight is teaching Erin to speak Dothraki, and she says to him at one point, "Dwight, I didn't know that you were teaching me a fake language." And he says, "People laughed at Klingon at first, but now you can major in it." And I have two questions. Is constructed language a fake language first? And can you major in constructed language?
Is it a fake language? I guess that's a matter of definition. Is art fake color? Like, is a painting fake color? Like, it's somebody's view of the world or of a situation or of a feeling that they crystallize, they put into form through whatever process they happen to use. And I don't think we would consider a painting fake. it may be not a perfect representation of a moment in time, but it's not fake, it's art. And I think a constructed language is very much the same. It's something drawn from someone's imagination, from various forms of inspiration. But once it's created, or even while it's in the process of being created, it's very real, and it's art. By comparison, I very frequently get asked, why would you invent a language? Like, why didn't you just, you being the general sense, why didn't George R. R. Martin or David Peterson or the showrunners teach, Jason Momoa and Emilia Clarke to speak Blackfoot or Navajo or something like that? And it's like, would you ever say to the Beatles, oh, you've written enough, we have enough music now, time to stop? AC/DC, thanks, but we've got enough music now. No, like, right, we're going to continue making art because that's something that defines us as humans. We create. And we don't want to misappropriate different cultures. Mark Okrand, when he was fleshing out creating the Klingon language, he very easily could have used a Native American indigenous language. His doctoral research in linguistics was on indigenous languages in California. And he said, no, like, Klingons are, at that time, like, they're the bad guys. Why would I try to associate an indigenous language with the bad guys and a culture that doesn't fit the language? And that's exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to repurpose, misappropriate someone's language for some other culture in a fantasy series. So depending on your definition, Klingon, Dothraki, whatever it happens to be, is a fake language in the sense that it's not a natural, occurring, historically evolved from real speaking people's language, but it's absolutely a real piece of art.
Great. And can you major in it?
Not that I'm aware of. That would be fantastic if you could at some point. I know a lot of universities out there are starting to teach constructed languages, usually in a linguistics department. So it's a really cool way to engage undergraduate students with what linguistics is, because if they have to think about what the phonetic inventory of something is, they have to be open to the possibility of sounds that don't exist in their native languages. They have to be able to read the IPA chart. They have to know what sounds could feasibly go together, or what rules they're breaking by putting sounds together that would not normally appear that way. They have to be able to know, if you have object, subject, verb syntax, the mailman the dog bit rather than the dog bit the mailman, you have to carry that order throughout your grammar and be consistent with whatever the natural way of speaking in your language is, barring whatever exceptions you also create. A lot of universities are allowing linguistics and language degrees to be supplemented by a conlanging course. There is a Klingon Language Institute where you can absolutely take courses in spoken and written Klingon. You can become a fluent second language speaker, but I'm not aware of any program that would allow you to major in Klingon or major in constructed languages yet.
You've mentioned that there are certain rules that are applied in natural languages. Do you have to apply those rules in conlangs? Let's describe it a little bit for our listeners.
The short answer to your question is you don't have to do anything in conlanging. Language is really cool because just about anything that we can say, this is what natural language does, there's a language out there that breaks the rules. So we like to say there's, almost every language on the planet has the sound t. Hawaiian doesn't have a T sound. It doesn't have a t. There's what we call an implicational universal if a language makes a contrast in voicing, chances are they will have the contrast between S and Z. Irish makes a contrast in voicing and it doesn't have a Z. Chances are, like, if you're going to head the syllable, whatever your head or your nucleus of a syllable is going to be a very sonorant sound. So there's a very loud, very rhythmic sound, like a vowel. And if you go away from vowels, we can have things like or ol in English, head syllables, syllabic consonants. But then you get a language like Blackfoot where you can have s be the nucleus of a syllable. So languages break the mold all the time. When we talk about breaking these linguistic tendencies for a language like Klingon, which is designed to be as non-human as possible, we take the rarest, or Mark Okrand took some of the rarest things and combined them in relatively novel ways. So you were just explaining what subject object was by discussing, what nominative or accusative is. We like to categorize our languages in terms of the order of a subject, the thing doing the action, a verb, the action itself, and an object, the thing having the action done to it. So English is a subject-verb-object language. The dog bit the mailman. It turns out that English is like, if I remember correctly, about 40% of the languages out there has that pattern. Subject, object, verb, the dog the mailman bit, if I remember correctly, again, is like Japanese, and that's a slightly higher percentage, around 43% of the world's languages. Gaelic languages, bit the dog the mailman, verb, subject, object. That's about 9% of the world's languages follow that pattern, and then obviously you go down from there. The rarest order, and we don't know if it's actually attested in any world's language, simply because the languages that show us object, verb, subject also allow other orders, so we're not entirely sure. Less than 1% of the world's languages, less than 1% of the 7,000 or so languages spoken in the world, allow the order object, verb, subject. Klingon is object, verb, subject. The sound is found in, I believe, 5 languages around the Balkans. So it's a very, very rare sound in any of Earth's languages. The sound tla is found in 8 North American indigenous languages, and that's it. Klingon has both of those sounds, and they can occur in the same word. So it is, you've got this European sound that's incredibly rare, and you've got this North American sound that's incredibly rare, and in no language in the world that we know of do these two languages co-occur. They co-occur in Klingon. So it's breaking those kind of tendencies or expectations.
Yeah, but in a way, you need to start somewhere. There is no way that you can escape that mold. Tolkien started with Finnish and Welsh for his Elvish languages.
Yeah, a lot of conlangers are influenced by natural languages. I'm working on a series of languages for an author out of the United States right now. An Elvish language, an Orc language, and a blend of Elvish with Middle German, actually. And he suggested that he wanted the Orc language to be similar in some regards to Eastern European or Slavic languages. He wanted the Elvish languages to have something in common with Celtic languages and go from there. But when I do this, I don't go, oh, okay, the word for fog in Russian is ngla, and go, okay, this is going to be my word, and I'm going to change it in very particular ways. I look at the system and I go, what characterizes Slavic languages? And I think one of my favorite things about Slavic languages is this palatalization distinction in the sounds. So you could contrast sa versus sia as two contrastive sounds. And, I build that kind of flavor into my language. But then if I look and go, Russian is a very case-heavy language, so you can have nominative case for the subject of the sentence, accusative case for the object of the sentence, dative case if you're going towards something, instrumental case if you're using something, so on and so forth. This gives Russian a fairly free word order, if I understand it correctly, or at least a lot of poetic licensing. Maybe I don't want to do that with the language I'm inventing, so I very purposely steer away from that. And the same is true when he asked me to create a Celtic sounding language, verb initial with initial mutations. So Bitch the dog, the mailman, word order, and the mailman might have some consonant change compared to just mailman on its own, or something like that. But I specifically sought out to go, okay, he wants it Celtic sounding, so that flow should be there, but let's make it distinctly non-Irish in the way I do this. And this is my perspective as someone whose goal is to make naturalistic conlangs. There are other conlangers out there who are experimenting in every way, shape, or form. Cy and Alex Fink, who is a Calgarian who lives in the UK, he's a professor of mathematics in the UK, they have collectively invented a gripping language, so the way you position your hands while you're holding hands with each other can actually be a way of speaking. And I don't believe they base that in any way, shape, or form on things like American Sign Language or German Sign Language or anything like that. They're also interested in non-linear languages, in a language that might be expressed by smells or by tastes. There was another conlanger, and this is before I joined the Language Creation Society, who experimented with these 3D morphs that would change shape and I believe change color, and that was the system for their language. And we see people putting these new spins on it. Deshto, Jack Bradley is his name. I can only remember his Klingon name for a second. Is a conlanger currently doing I believe, Master of Fine Arts degree in the United States, and he's looking at subway maps as a modus of communications. And if you indicated what stop you were on or what direction you were going on, I don't understand his language yet. I think he's still working on it, but you could get different interpretations based on those things. So you don't have to start with a natural language, which is one of the really cool things and really solidifies conlanging as an art.
What is the future of conlanging? What do you think?
My personal belief is, thanks to a few very forward-thinking producers and directors in Hollywood and that sort of industry, we're going to see more and more conlangs. I know a lot of beginning authors writing novels are reaching out to the Language Creation Society to hire someone to create a language for their novel, because they see things like Klingon, like Dothraki, like Sindarin, the Black Speech, or anything like that from Tolkien, and they feel that this is a valuable thing to add, like I like to say, verisimilitude to their world. It makes their world real. It makes their characters real. And thanks to some excellent work by people like Mark Oakgrand, Trent Pearson, David J. Peterson, Christine Schreier, we're seeing more and more conlangs in popular media. The movie Alpha came out a couple of years ago, and that was Cro-Magnon was a conlang that Christine Schreier did, and the entire movie was nothing but that conlang. Brilliant work. Hearing Khal Drogo, Jason Momoa, speak Dothraki really impassionately, you wouldn't have that performance if he was trying to do it in English. And the more and more producers and directors that are realizing this, they're bringing conlanging into the mainstream. They're making it popular. They're making it, I think we're just shy of making it an essential component of these fantasy worlds. So I think the future of conlanging is going to be this popularization and seeing more and more of it. If you were to ask David Peterson what the future of conlanging is, and I feel it's very important to include what I think he would answer, is he would say, conlanging is at least 800 years old. We had Saint Hildegard von Bingen conlanging in the 1200s, and we're still in our infancy. We're still seeing where we can push this art. And I think he would say, like you saw a transition from realism to abstractionist painting to, just completely out there forms of artwork that we see in other media, he would suggest we're only starting to see what we can do with constructed languages, and we're going to find new ways to push the boundaries of it as an art. I don't know what that looks like, because if I did, maybe I would be making it. But I think he's absolutely right. We're going to see new, brilliantly creative takes on what a language can be.
How proficient are you in Klingon?
I have to look everything up still. I'm reasonably good at translating. I tend to post my translations to the Learn Klingon Facebook group to make sure I'm doing it right, or to get corrections if I'm doing it wrong. Typically with like embedded clauses and things like that. But I like to think I'm fairly proficient in reading it. Once it's written down, I can get the sounds right, and I can translate fairly accurately.
What is your favorite expression from Klingon or from any other constructed language? We can finish with some quotes that you like.
I put a lot of thought into it, and one of the first things that came to mind was in season 3 of Game of Thrones. There's this amazing reveal where Emilia Clarke says something like, "Valirio Muño Engos Nuisisa." Valyrian is my mother tongue. And it was like, oh, yes! And then I started thinking of other things that Emilia Clarke and Jason Momoa had in Dothraki when they were speaking. And back in season 1, and this might require a little explanation because it's incredibly nerdy, but Khal Drogo, Jason Momoa says, "Sofosor naka she havasi kazga." The earth ends at the Black Sea, and Daenerys, played by Emilia Clarke, responds with something like "Sofosor nako vasechi," and the earth never ends. And I'll get you to focus on that word "sorfosor," earth, because she then goes on to say, "Sani sorfi veka yome, sorfe athiolariani." I'm probably butchering the Dothraki here, but that very similar word "sofosor," earth, becomes "sorfo," dirt. So she actually says there are many dirts across the sea, the dirts of my birth. And Jason Momoa looks over his shoulder in the scene, and he says, "Vo sorfo raishi," not dirts, lands. And he actually corrects Daenerys's grammar. So she's saying, the land where I was born, not the dirt where I was born. And it was at that moment I was like, this is brilliant. We're having a discussion about grammar of a constructed language in a constructed language. And the reason that this is one of my favorite back and forths in a constructed language of all time is because when I was quite young, so back in the 1980s when Star Trek The Next Generation was airing, they came out with a VCR board game, a VHS board game, and the actor who played Gowron, a Klingon, played Commander Kavak, I think his name was, and he stole the Enterprise, and it was your job as the person playing this board game to get the Enterprise back. And one of the first things he does is he says something like Klingon hol dashata, which is, we call this paramount hol, or paramount language. Terrible Klingon that doesn't mean anything. But he tried to say Klingon hol dajat, do you speak Klingon? And I remember being this, 8-10-year-old boy, where I was like, this is amazing. Klingon is a language you could speak. And for whatever reason, as I grew up, I always remembered the phrase Kushdak Batlu'a, is this seat taken? And later when I could learn Klingon, like, this was amazing. And the idea that you could have conversations about your language in this constructed language was phenomenal. And the reason I say that, finally getting to the answer to your question, was two phrases out of Klingon are probably my favorite things of all time. The first one is Kol Yechu, light the fire. And this was a phrase that they said in, I think it was the very first episode of season 1 of Star Trek Discovery. And when I heard T'Kovma making this speech, and he said, Kol Yechu, light the fire, as an imperative command to the torchbearer, without subtitles, I understood that, and this was amazing to me that I actually understood the Klingon on screen. And I looked over, and my girlfriend had this look of recognition, and I'm like, this is amazing. How does she realize what's going on? And I think it's because one of the original series Star Trek movies, one of the first things you hear in Klingon in that movie is Jol Yichu. This is Christopher Lloyd's Klingon character saying, activate the transport beam. And later in the movie, William Shatner, as Captain Kirk, grabs the Klingon communicator and he screams, Jol Yichu! Beam me up, essentially. And the second time they say that, there was no subtitles. And Mark Okrand likes to tell the story where he was in the theater for this being released. And he's like, this is the moment. This is looking around, and Klingon is spoken, and everyone's like, yes. They understood it without the subtitles. He's like, it works. It's a great conlang. And Jol Yichu in the original and Kul Yichu in the new one, it just had that continuity and that recognition factor. And I thought that was so brilliantly done. And shortly after that, they come up with a new chant in Klingon, which is Klingon mach tach jaj. And we've always had sort of the Klingon idiom, Klingon mach, we are Klingon. But then to add tach jaj, which is the verb to continue, tach, and it's a type 9 suffix, jaj, may, or let it be. And I thought this was just so brilliant that you've expanded an idiom from we are Klingon to Klingon mach tach jaj, remain Klingon. And it's not that tach jaj was a new word. The title of the Klingon Imperial Anthem is tach jaj wo, may the empire persist or continue or endure. And to repurpose this endure thing, or may it continue, into remain and blend it into an idiom that just became this unifying battle cry for the Klingon people, I thought was just the most amazing bit of both writing and translation work. It's something so simple, something incredibly nerdy, but I absolutely love it.
Thank you very much for being a part of this podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for thinking of me and thinking of conlanging as a topic that you assume people will enjoy. I hope so, for sure.
That was brilliant, Joy Windsor, and I was enjoying every minute of our conversation. Make sure to tune in to the upcoming Linguistically Aware episodes on CJSW 90.9 FM. If you want to know more about linguists based in Calgary, make sure to visit calgarylinguistics.ca. If you want to know more about Conlang, visit conlang.org or fiatlingua.org. That's all for today. Have a great month and see you soon.